Hello and welcome to World Inside, the program coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. Let's start with the latest on the coronavirus, also known as COVID-19. The total number of confirmed cases in China is over 74,000. The death toll stands at over 2,000, while more than 12,000 have recovered. The virus has spread to 25 other countries, which altogether have reported more than 900 cases. As the virus spreads, so too has the economic repercussions. The brewing viral epidemic means there might be an extra hurdle on the global economy and businesses. Before we get to the discussion, take a look at the latest first.
New confirmed COVID-19 cases are being reported daily around the world. The virus has been recorded in several countries in the Asia-Pacific, Europe, North America, Africa, and the Middle East. The World Health Organization has called on nations to speed up research on the COVID-19, while cautioning that travel restrictions and quarantines directed at individual countries might do more harm than good, after a series of drastic measures in response to the epidemic crisis. The U.S. was the first to evacuate personnel from its consulate in Wuhan and the first to impose a travel ban on Chinese travelers. Tough policies from the U.S. government have been seen by many as a challenge to the U.S.-China bilateral relationship. Sui Tiankai, the Chinese ambassador to the United States, has warned both sides to guard against any political virus, in addition to the biological one. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently slammed the imposition of travel bans as an overreaction and urged the United States not to take unnecessary measures that could hamper trade and travel.
Given the U.S. comprehensive ban on people-to-people exchange between the two countries, practically that will bring up some challenges to the implementation of the agreement. We hope all parties can respect the WHO's professional advice not to take unnecessary trade and travel restrictions.
Fears over the coronavirus's impact on the global economy have been growing. Several large companies said their production may be hurt and the damage may spill over into various industries. On Monday, tech titan Apple warned of global supply shortages resulting from factories being shut down due to the COVID-19 outbreak. The Phase 1 trade agreement between China and the U.S. went into effect on February 14. There is concern about the impact of shutdowns imposed by the coronavirus. Chinese authorities acknowledged the likely economic impact of the COVID-19 outbreak, and they said enough measures were taken to cushion any fallout.
So how has the COVID-19 outbreak changed the relationship between China and the United States and having its repercussions on the global economy and the trade relations between the two countries? The relation is getting better or worse in sickness and in health? To understand better, let's invite through Skype Greg Gilligan. He's now in Beijing. He's the chairman of AmCham China. Greg, what a pleasure to see you right here on the program.
Always a pleasure to speak with you, Wei.
Thank you, Greg. Tell me, first of all, of the solidarity and also the sympathies being expressed by the American business community in China, members of AmCham, this time as supporting the Chinese people throughout the outbreak of COVID-19. What is the latest?
Right now, American Chamber of Commerce China members have donated goods and funds to the tune of about $66 million US. We expect that that number probably will continue to grow, but that's what it was as of February 17. And that is simply us, caring for the society in which we live and work. We call ourselves the American Chamber of Commerce, but in fact, we're a collection of Americans and Chinese people working together in American enterprise, serving these communities here. So we did this survey and checked with our membership because of the response rate of the survey. Actually, the number of 66 million US dollars only represents about less than 10% of the member companies that responded. So the number could be quite larger.
But maybe
as I expected, it could also grow and doesn't include donation of services like logistics and transportation and insurance. So really, we're very proud of what American companies are doing here to help.
But many wonder, Greg, whether it is only an action of PR, public relations, because as you may know, some people here in China might ask that question as a result of a long time lack of trust deficit between the two countries. So are these just PR actions coming from American business community?
The answer is a resounding no. They are not simply PR actions. What they are is us caring about, the communities we live in and we work in. Care about our people here and all of our wonderful friends and partners. It's a great question, though, and it deserves a little more exploration. Like anything in the U.S.-China relationship, it involves some cultural differences. And it causes me to think back to 2008 after the Wenchuan earthquake, when American business actually learned a lot from Chinese enterprise. Culturally speaking, American businesses would tend, in a situation like this, to want to be low-key and downplay any communication around these type of things like humanitarian aid. But what we learned at that time was that we had to put on our socialist thinking caps. We needed to be like our Chinese enterprise friends. We were caring for the communities, but also letting them know what we were doing, which in China society is viewed as appropriate and really a marker of commitment and compassion.
I see. Let me ask you about this. There's a survey that's been done by members of AmCham from one of the well-developed areas in China. I wouldn't mention the places specifically, but the number had been showing that 78% of the respondents said they do not have sufficient staff right now at their Chinese plants to resume full production. And also, they're suggesting public health restrictions make it harder for workers to return to their jobs. Now, that's the number. But on the other hand, Greg, as you may know, in a public health outbreak like this, containment and control, quarantine and treatment, extremely important, particularly in different localities. So how should we see this balance of, once again, making sure people are healthy, on the other hand, also resumption of work, resumption of production?
First of all, everybody agrees that the absolute imperative is to slow down, control, and eventually eradicate the spread of COVID-19. That's without question. Let's also recognize just how incredibly difficult it is for the local officials to strike the balance that's necessary going forward. I can't imagine the burdens and challenges they face. However, people need several things. First of all, they need to stay safe and healthy, but they also need an income to take care of themselves and their families. And society needs a functioning economy. So we get back to this question of how do we strike that balance. Absolutely, controlling the virus comes first, but a very close second is how do we get people back to work? How do we support the resumption of productivity such that society can function? And so there's a lot of measures that are in place, but they came into place very quickly, and maybe they weren't fully thought out about what the ramifications of certain measures would be. So we need tweaking, we need more support and coordination from the central authority down to the various geographies such that that balance is handled well.
Right.
So yeah, we're having challenges on getting people back to work in place and trying to work with government to strike that balance in the best possible way.
Talking about central government, Greg, as you may have noticed together with members of AmCham China, that the central government of China has been putting out one measure after another over the past 2 weeks in order to gear up the economy and putting confidence into investors' minds. Whether these policies are likely to be beautifully implemented through what time frame, and which policies do you think might benefit American businesses the most, given the current circumstances, Greg?
In our view, and reflected by our members, what's absolutely essential at this moment in time is resumption of work measures and measures that allow the greatest amount of productivity we can while keeping people safe. Other measures about longer-term support for business, those are great, they're necessary, they're welcome. But what's really the first thing to do is to make sure that people are back at work in a safe environment and we can ramp up productivity. Right now, that's necessary for society, as we mentioned a moment ago. It's also necessary so that people can generate revenue, because in situations like this, revenue and then cash flow is king.
Yeah.
You need to be able to survive to enjoy later policy that can help you out through a tough time. But if you're not around when those policies do come into place, then that's a challenge. So smaller enterprise, medium-sized enterprise are going to have less wherewithal, less ability to endure revenue and cash flow challenges.
On the other hand, this in a way demonstrates, some argue, Greg, the interlink between the Chinese economy and the American economy, between the Chinese business community and the American business community. Within a few weeks' time, we have already seen that people are crying for reconnected again, and also crying for the opportunity to work together. So this, in a way, is rather ironic, because earlier during the protracted trade war between the two countries, those things have not been heard out loud, and it is only taking a crisis like this, unfortunately, that these voices are coming out and pointing us to the right direction, it seems.
Solidarity is crucial in times like these. We have a lot of shared interests. Yes, we have some other things that cause tension in the relationship, but we can't conflate the two. We can't bring those together. Right now, our common interest is to combat COVID-19, get the economy back on track, and continue to do well together. There's so many areas of global mutual interest that China and the U.S. share. This is certainly one of them. We need to keep that in mind.
On the other hand, Greg, if I could continue our conversation, one is not only about the American and Chinese business communities doing business in China, but also in other parts of the world. I understand your sister or brother, AmCham, in Vietnam have also been doing service among their members, and it seems that without the global supply chain member like China in operation, many of the American businesses in other parts of Asia and elsewhere in the world are also having a difficult time starting their operations and manufacturing, at least for the longer term.
Certainly, because our two economies are so interconnected, and the most striking example, of course, is global supply chain. So when there's a hiccup in global supply chain or a serious disruption, as we have right now, global enterprise everywhere is going to feel it. And so again, that comes back to our mutual interest, or our common interest, in getting through this crisis and then being able to move forward after COVID-19 is controlled and put away.
But there seems to be something going on between the governments, it seems, not between the business communities, fortunately, but between the governments. If I could, Greg, people have been talking about the U.S. State Department, issuing the highest alert travel ban against China, and also has been asking people who have been to China's Hubei to be quarantined at least 2 weeks once arriving in the United States, and also ban any traveling of any foreigners who have been to China over the past 2 weeks, for example. So people see this as rather measures further blocking the interactions between China and the United States. What do you think, and what does that mean mean for business communities like yours, which making the international travel a must in your daily work?
I think that these actions from quite a few countries are simply trying to protect their borders and people at home, and in the same way that China is trying to fight the virus here. So I'll leave it at that and then speak more closely to impact to AmCham China member companies, executives. The virus really became well known and understood and more of a concern during the Chinese New Year. And at that time, many of our executives, whether they're American or Chinese executives, they were offshore on holiday, and many of them remain offshore right now. In the last week or so, a good number of them have begun to return and get back to work. So what they'll do then is to self-quarantine for 14 days so that they can ensure that they bring themselves back to work in a safe manner. Now, if we're talking about workers in knowledge work or white-collar services, etc., that's much more manageable. But if you're talking about production or other services like logistics and transportation, healthcare, the tourism or hospitality industry, etc., there's a long list of industries that are really going to struggle because it's not the executives coming back from holiday offshore, it's the larger workforce. So how do you get the PRC national workforce back to work, assure their safety, and then also allow productivity to ramp up?
Right.
So that's where our challenge is.
I guess there's a lot to explore with weeks ahead. How should we figure out the solution in a crisis like this? Always a big question mark, but also always a big opportunity to work together. Thank you so much, Greg Gilligan, Chairman of AmCham China. Really appreciate it, Greg. All the best to you and your members. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
And further our discussion, I'm joined in Bangkok by Jeffrey Townsend, who is a professor at Peking University and host of Jeff's Asia Tech class. And also joining us in Hong Kong, we have Hong Hao, Managing Director and Head of Research at Bocom International. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. You heard my earlier conversation with Greg Gilligan, the Chairman of AmCham China. Obviously, there are several sectors in our conversation that we worth to be discussed again. One is car manufacturing. The other, of course, is catering industry, including travel services, hotels, and also restaurants, things like that. How are we going to see these sectors likely to be affected by the current crisis? Mr. Hong.
Yeah, well, I think the box office intake during the holiday season is down 99.9%. So I think that's pretty much decimated. And also car sales is down, to the level of 10% of normal sales during this time of the year. So I think all the service industries are very hard hit. I think people are hoping for some sort of a consumption stimulus to help these industries to recover after the virus spread. But I think, going forward, in the next 3 quarters, I think, the hope for recovery in the service sector is running very high.
And Mr. Townsend, of course, car manufacturing, a big chunk of trade. If you look at Wuhan, that is a big town for car manufacturers. Big donation, or rather contribution, to the national economy when it comes to the percentage also. So, Mr. Townsend, how do you see that, and how long are we likely to see the industry still trying to struggle up?
Right. I would look at this sort of on the demand side and on the production side.
Sure.
If you look at, say, cars being sold in the U.S., well, American consumers are still buying cars. Chinese consumers aren't buying a lot of cars this month. Most people are waiting and seeing what's going to happen. So it depends if you're going to get the demand hit as well as the issue of, look, we've got to get people back into the factories and back to working. I suspect the car industry generally has a demand problem in China this month. You're probably going to wait a month or so to buy.
Right.
But that bigger question of how do we get people back into the factories, how do we get people out of their apartments, I think that was mentioned earlier in the discussion, that it's going to be balancing this need to get the economy back moving, but not taking undue risks and, protecting safety as well as production. It's going to be balancing those two factors, I think.
It's always a delicate balance, I think, as the time goes by over the next few weeks, as we see the latest information coming out. Having said that, though, there are certain sectors that are very active, in fact, over the past few weeks since the outbreak. We see online education, we see pharmaceutical companies, we also see, some kinds of online entertainment, even online disco. We have seen recently a fad like that in the Chinese home economy, as they say these days, quote unquote. So, Mr. Hong, how do you see the prospect of these areas? Will this be a starting point, a jumping point for these industries if we talk about the economy?
Yeah, I think while you gain some and you lose some, because kids are not, back to school for safety reason, for healthcare reason. So I think many of the classes actually being conducted online. And also many forms of entertainment, for example, movie viewing is moved onto the internet as well. So I think these industries are having a sort of unusual boom this time of the year. Now, if you compare to 2003, back then, most of the businesses are conducted on a brick-to-mortar basis. So now the situation has changed substantially, and I think these industries that you mentioned just now would benefit to a certain extent from this virus.
Mr. Townsend, you've been researching about the Chinese business landscape for a long time. So remember, it was during and after SARS. Alibaba has eventually decided on its direction of development. I'm not trying to say there is a big silver lining out of this crisis. I'm just saying this is a reality and businesses have to deal with. What do you think might be some of the ideas that could come out this time? Of course, the size of the Chinese economy now is very different from earlier times.
Right. I mean, we're definitely going to see a surge in just volume of things like people watching videos. Fine. But we're also seeing a surge in innovation. I mean, there's a lot of new ideas happening right now. During the SARS crisis, there was a small retailer in Beijing that only had physical stores. And because of the SARS crisis, their people couldn't come into the office. So they said, let's try selling online for the first time. Yeah. That's Jingdong. That's how they got into online commerce. So we're seeing a surge of this sort of online education technology, business-to-business interactions, WeChat Work, DingTalk. I mean, there's a whole lot going on right now. And I think that's going to pay off 5 years from now. We're going to look back at this as a pivotal moment for certain businesses.
But, there is always an issue going on there, Mr. Hong, if I could. That is, what about the kinds of companies that are active here? Now we see the small and medium-sized companies are really suffering as a result of long delays of going back to work. But on the other hand, you see these internet giants are getting ever stronger during this period of time because their services they're providing and the ability to switch as a result of their strong backing are really functioning. But then you also look at the foreign companies as a result of the lack of workers and things like that. It could be difficult for them to restart as they were before the holiday. So there seems to be also some landscape changing, Mr. Hong. I don't know whether it's short term or going to be much longer term.
Well, I think the trend to move things online has been happening even before the virus spread. I think you've seen Alibaba, Tencent, and Meituan amongst the others. These platform companies actually taking market share from traditional retail. So it's not surprising that now the virus spread seems to be accelerating this trend. And also, in terms of smaller business, they're having some working capital, cash flow problems, and they're getting help from the central bank to a certain extent. And also, I think, cooperation, from the workers, not to be paid, for some of the days in February also helped the cash flow as well. So I think the trend is quite clear even before the virus spread.
Mr. Townsend? The different kinds of companies, Chinese, internet giants, foreign companies, small and medium-sized companies, different categories.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it at the corporate level, it's about cash flow. Everyone just needs the cash flow to survive. But more important to that is salaries. At a certain point, small businesses go to pay their salaries of their employees on the first of the month, and there's just no money there because people aren't buying tickets to Disneyland this month. And that's actually, I think, the harder problem to solve. You can close a business and restart it in a month. You can close a factory. If you can't pay people, that's a big social problem. So I think that's probably the number one priority is keep people getting their salaries and then keep the businesses alive as well.
On the other hand, there could be some anticipate once the outbreak slows down and things going much more back to normal, an eruption of consumption power out of the Chinese. You know, if you look around among your friends, there are people talking online about what food they really want to have, you know, which restaurant they really want to go, which place they really want to travel once they could be free out of the disease. So how do we see the potential of this so-called eruption of consumption power, Mr. Hong?
I am less optimistic about that. You know, simply you can't eat, you know, all the missing meals that you missed out in February and March, and then, you know, try to make it up in the next 3 quarters. But having said that, you know, you should see a rebound in consumption after the virus being controlled. And I think for now, you know, from the official numbers, the infection of the virus seems to seems to be behind us. So I would say that, you know, with very strong quarantine efforts, and also, you know, with medical help from all around the world, I would say that, you know, the outlook is looking more promising now.
Mr. Townsend, of course, many people have been warning us, you know, it's too early to say what is likely to be the turning point, but we always have the best wishes, of course, for the economy and also certainly for the health of the people. Having said that, though, there are a lot of uncertainties. For example, whether the virus is likely to spread further into other parts of the world. Knocking the wood, I hope it would not, but we do not know in a public health crisis like this. So, Mr. Townsend, how much uncertainties do we still have to bear in mind while we are thinking about a way out, Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 factors here. One is how much we don't know.
A lot, right?
The problem with viruses is, the problem with viruses is it's a system-wide phenomenon. It's not like one hospital can study their patients. You have to know what's happening everywhere, which is actually very, very difficult to do. Public health is difficult. But the other factor is there's a learning curve here. And the system and the hospitals and the people are getting smarter and are able to deal with uncertainties now far better than they could have, say, a month ago. So they're getting better at managing the situation as we go. And I think that's kind of going to be one of the biggest factors here is everyone's getting smarter. Businesses, people, government, hospitals. And so we'll probably deal with new uncertainties better now than, say, the beginning of January.
Hope everyone is getting smarter except the virus. Thank you so much for the 2 of you. If I could have both of them once again on the screen, Jeffrey Townsend and Hong Hao. Really appreciate it. Thank you.